Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. I am your host, Shelly Ann Edwards Barron, a creative writing specialist who is absolutely obsessed with multisensory learning in the writing classroom. If you're new to the live, I guess I should explain a little bit about what multisensory learning is and a little bit more about myself, and then we'll get into it. So, multisensory learning is the use of activities that engage students using multiple senses at the same time in a lesson. So we're looking at, yes, we had the visual and the auditory, but we're also looking at movement and feelings and, the touch and smell and taste and all those other things. Now, not all at once, if it is not always possible to do all of them at once, but throughout the scope of a lesson, you want to touch with as many of them as possible. If you can touch with all of them, perfect, but you really want to touch with many of them as possible. And the thing with creative writing is that there are so many opportunities to do this, but it takes a little bit of know-how to fit the actual lessons into what it is you want to do to really get the writing engaging for students. So that is what I am all about, and I share quite a lot of that during this series as we journey to SEA. And again, if you're new, go to SEA, the Peacefield Approach. If you're already there, check in the files section and you would get a download for the schedule because I'm following a schedule for these lives. And so you would know what's coming up next and so on. I know today's a holiday, happy Indian Arrival Day for those who are celebrating. I'm still here because I have scheduled my days so that I take my break in August and in December. So I'm here with you. I know many of you are at home, and so maybe you'd be able to take in the live, ask questions, and those types of things. So I wanted to be here, and plus we'd be finished by 12 and then I'll be off, right? So, today we're talking about we're continuing our discussion. If you're looking at this, you happen to be looking at it at YouTube or on my website. You can also get the schedules on my website if you don't already have the schedules downloaded. There's a page on my website which is wordcoach.com, werdcoach.com. You can go to Journey to SEA 2024. You'll see that as one of the tabs. And in there, you'd get all the lives that have passed before, as well as the schedules to download. There's one schedule for report writing, one schedule for narrative writing. And so you would be able to check back what you've missed, go through the videos, get that information, and get yourself started. So it is so definitely not too late to begin. There's a lot that we have covered, some foundation concepts, but if you double up, I normally go live every week, once every Tuesday. If you double up, do two a week, you can catch up with us in no time. All right. Now, as per usual, what I'm going to do is we'll do reports first and then get into narratives. Today's session for reports has to do with vocabulary. We're going to be talking a little bit about a few strategies that you can use to help build your child's vocabulary, especially with the formal type of vocabulary that you need for reports. And a little word of caution because you while you want to have the sophisticated language and you want the formal vocabulary, remember that you want to have the type of vocabulary that feels a little bit more natural for the student, for your child. So, words like aforementioned, for example, I remember I had a student who was very, very attached to the aforementioned. And in speaking with him, I actually didn't insist that he remove it because his entire tone and the way he spoke with me was usually quite formal. And I think he was with his grandmother, who was a very structured lady and very, you know, polite and that type of thing. And I believe that's the way that she would speak and have those kinds of formal conversations with him. So I gave him a few alternatives to soften it a little bit, because remember, this is a report from a student to a principal or to somebody in authority. It's not on the level of, let's say, a master's student or PhD student. So words like aforementioned, I remember that one in particular because it really did strike me as a bit odd for a primary school child to be using a word like aforementioned. But he I didn't tell him don't use it, but I did tell him these are some alternatives that would help the writing flow a little bit differently. And so he opted for using a variety of transitions and so on that worked a little bit better. But he did use the affirmation aforementioned still from time to time. Um, so I think that's one word of caution. We do, while we want the formal vocabulary, we do need to be careful about how we get into that vocabulary and what would seem natural and appropriate for the students of the age that we're working with. So if you are here and you are taking in the live, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for spending the moments with me today. If you're looking at the recording, thank you for your time there as well. And feel free to message with questions, ask questions. You can contact me via WhatsApp on 717-4993, or you can message me on Facebook. You can look for Shelley Ann Edwards Barron. You can find me in the Facebook group and on my Facebook page, Wood Coach Youth. You can send a message there as well. So thank you for taking the time to, view the live or the recording, and I'm here to help you with the creative writing as best as possible. Okay, so let's get to the formal vocabulary and language. And before we get into like two or three specific strategies for helping students build that kind of vocabulary, I thought it would have been really useful to go through a paragraph with some informal language to identify why the language was informal, what is wrong with it, and show you one option of making the changes. All right, so let me share my screen and then we will get to that. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now, and I'll just read the paragraph which says, I ran to the office and reported the incident to Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry came back to the classroom. He took Eric and Josiah with him to the principal's office. Then he called their parents. The students were suspended for 7 days. Mr. Henry was disappointed in how they behaved. So let's take a look at that and identify some of the issues um, with this paragraph. So there are a couple of things. The first one has to do definitely with the vocabulary, which is not as formal as it could be. So, for example, I ran to the office. That's a very common casual way to say what happened. Um, he took Eric and Josiah. So took is also a bit informal. Then he called parents, informal. Um, and then we have the issue of the students were suspended for 7 days. Mr. Henry was disappointed in how they behaved. So the students were suspended for 7 days. How do you know that? Were you at the principal's office? Why were you at the office? Um, that information needs to be included in order for the reader to understand how you got this information. Um, in this case, perhaps Mr. Henry is one of the teachers. This particular paragraph is not a beginning paragraph, so we're missing some details, but we're going to work with it as if Mr. Henry was one of the teachers and not the recipient of the report. Okay. But we do still need to clarify how we know, as a writer, how do we know that the students were suspended and parents were called. Also, that last sentence which said Mr. Henry was disappointed in how they behaved. How do we know Mr. Henry was disappointed? If it is that we are just saying that we think that, then that's our opinion. If it is that Mr. Henry said he was disappointed, then we need to absolutely put that, excuse me, into reported speech. So there's a lot that's happening with this paragraph that we could work on. So the number one thing, the language, we need to work on making the language more formal. Two, we need to work on being clear with how we came about to know some of the details. And three, because of that last sentence being perhaps Mr. Henry's feelings or what's in his head, we definitely need to include some reported speech there to, if we want to keep those details. Um, and I think it's a nice detail. It's an interesting detail that we can use in the paragraph, but we do need to make sure that it's presented in a formal way, not representing our opinions or our own personal ideas as a writer. Um, there's also something else happening with the paragraph that makes a difference with the formal tone. Now, if you look at the sentences, most of the sentences are short, simple sentences that do not include um, conjunctions. I think we have one conjunction, but the rest of them, and these are coordinating conjunctions, we don't have, well, we have one transition, but it's a transition word, not a transition phrase. And while transition words are acceptable, they tend to make sentences feel more abrupt and not create the kind of formal flow and formal tone in a report that we really want to see. So, and the transition word would be then. So then he called their parents. So it's a short sentence, it's very abrupt, and it doesn't create that formal flow that you want from this kind of academic writing to really create that sort of formal tone. So let's look at an alternative paragraph using these same details. What would that paragraph possibly look like if it is we elevated some of the language and adjusted some of the sentences, introduced a few transitions, and possibly maybe even separate the paragraphs so that we can add in some more details. So let's take a look at that. So here is the revised version of the information that we had. And let's see what works. Maybe some of it might still need some tweaking. But let's see what we've done so far. This is the revised information. I'm going to read it out. When I reported the incident to Mr. Henry at the staff room, he accompanied me to the classroom and ordered the students to the principal's office. Mr. Henry requested that I return to the principal's office to report what I had observed. At the office, parents were contacted and both students were suspended for 7 days. While waiting for parents to arrive, Mr. Henry informed Eric and Josiah that he was disappointed with their behavior. So now let's break down and look at some of the changes that were made and whether or not anything is missing and how we could really understand what was done to make it sound a little bit more formal. So let's look at the first sentence. Now, a couple of things that were done were had to do with introduction of transition phrases and combination of some of the ideas. So notice that in the previous one, let's go back. In the previous one, we had one, two, three, four, five, six sentences but each sentence had pretty much like one idea. I ran to the principal office. Okay, so two ideas in some of them. I ran to the principal office, reported the incident to Mr. Henry, right? Mr. Henry came back to the classroom. He took Eric and Josiah with him to the principal's office. So here we have like details given one at a time almost. And what that creates is a very, I guess, what writers will call choppy kind of sentence. Choppy meaning that, you can imagine it like a body of water. Like let's say you're at the sea and or even at a river and you're looking at the water as the flow. So yes, it's flowing because we have information and we're getting new information as we go. But what's happening is that every time we get to the end of a sentence, it's like a stop. So, or, a bump or, a wave or something happening. So we have, I ran to the office and reported the incident to Mr. Henry. Seems okay, but we do have to formalize that ran too. Um, but then we get Mr. Henry came back to the classroom. He took Eric and Josiah with him to the principal's office. Then he called their parents. The students were suspended for 7 days. Mr. Henry was disappointed. So if you're reading this paragraph, then you're going like this, up and down, up and down, up and down. And it creates a very almost aggressive, um, you know, overly energetic, too direct, to the point, no flow really. You really don't feel like if there's a gradual transition and flow from one detail to the next. So let's look at what's happening with this one. Here, because of the transition phrases, what we're getting is a more gradual flow of the information. So here we have, when I reported the incident to Mr. Henry at the staff room, and we dip because there's a comma, but then we continue because the sentence continues. So we're getting a more, gradual flow. And it's the same thing with the beginning sentence of the next paragraph. So we're getting a smoother flow and therefore creating a more formal tone when we adjust the paragraphs and include transitions. So this is one of the reasons why transition words are absolutely necessary in a report. But notice that instead of saying then, we have a transition phrase beginning with when and beginning with at. So when indicates time, at would indicate location. So what we have there is a transition that shows time in the first paragraph. And in the second one, we have a transition that shows location. And so using these, and then I think in the second paragraph as well, we have while, which also shows time. And what that shows, it gives readers information about location and time, which are the two that you really want to focus on in your report. And so we get that formal tone being activated by using the transition words that lead into phrases and not just those transition words that are, like then, after, comma, afterward, comma. The phrases really help build that formal tone. All right, so we have that going for this second version. Also, in this second version, we have the variation in the language also. So instead of saying I ran to the office, it's not absolutely necessary for the reader to even know that information. Remember, in a report, you're working with carefully selecting the details that would help the reader make the decision that they need to make. So, how is knowing that you ran to the office going to help them make a decision? It doesn't really. It focuses the report on what you did as the person who observed And even if you're participating, it really directs the focus more on you. And while you are involved, the report is supposed to be about the complete situation, the complete incident, and it really isn't supposed to be directing only to what you did and what you said and so on. So we can just take that out altogether and indicate what we did. We reported the incident to Mr. Henry. And here's where we add in a detail. Where was Mr. Henry at the staff room? So we're giving readers enough information to work with and understand what's happening, but we're not overly directing information to ourselves as the writer. And then instead of he came back, he accompanied me to the classroom. And instead of took the students to the office, he ordered the students to the principal's office. And these are things that we can observe based on what is happening. And Mr. Henry requested that I return to the principal's office to report what I had observed. That sentence allows us to include the information about when parents were contacted and what happened at the principal's office, because now we know that we were also there as a writer, as an observer. We were there to observe these things because we were also taken to the principal's office to report what we had seen. So that sentence allows us to include some of the other details later on. And then we have the last sentence, which has been revised to again include details that we can say were observed. So Mr. Henry informed Eric and Josiah that he was disappointed with their behavior. So by using those words, Mr. Henry informed, what we are indicating is that this is reported speech. And as reported speech, we can include these kinds of details. Now, if Mr. Henry is not the principal and he is addressing the issue and you are reporting to the principal, one of the things that principals are also interested in, yes, they want to know exactly what happened with the incident itself, but one of the things that principals will be interested in is how their teachers handled a situation. And if a teacher is addressing an issue and you are there and you are privileged to hear and see what the teacher is doing, that is, you can include some of those details in your report because that is something that the principal would be interested in. So that the we're saying that when Mr. Henry took the students to the office, he contacted parents, he issued the suspension, and then he further reprimanded the students. So now a principal looking at this wouldn't necessarily say, well, okay, I need to issue a reprimand or punishment. Punishment has already been issued. So was it within Mr. Henry's right to do that? Is he the vice principal? Again, we're in a part of a report. We don't have the whole thing, so some details could be are missing that we're assuming here. But if he is within his right to do this, and therefore, the whoever is reading it can follow up, follow through, um, maybe address the length of it. Is it appropriate? They can make decisions like that. So once you are privileged to be there when decisions are made, you can report that. But it is absolutely necessary for you to make it known how you managed to be there to get this information. You cannot take it for granted that these are things that should be known. Remember who you are as the writer. You are writing from the perspective of a child within the context of a school, And sometimes children are able to hear and see things in staff rooms, things are happening around them. But if you were not there, how would you get this information? So the fact that you were there has to be made clear to readers if the details can be legitimately included in the report. So, again, this is one version. So there are different ways to do these things, but I just wanted to show you the difference between the informal, a report that is going to be considered having several issues, which would be this one. This is one paragraph. And what we're looking at is how and what can be done to make this kind of language more formal. So we changed came back to accompanied me to. We changed took to ordered. We changed then to at the office. So we're giving a smoother transition. We're changing the students were suspended because now we want to make it clear um, how we came to this information, so we adjusted that. Also, the last sentence we converted to reported speech so that we could include it. Otherwise, it cannot be included simply because it expresses Mr. Henry's emotions and opinions, and we would not know that unless he said it out loud. So we do have to pay attention to these things when it comes to reports. So let's go back. So when I reported, so we have that transition phrase there. Um, we included Mr. Henry requested that I return to the principal's office. So now we know why we are there and how it is we would have come by the other details that are given in the next paragraph. Now I separated it for the sake of clarity, the two separate paragraphs. Um, for some students, I think it should be okay if you put all together, but I feel like this paragraph here, the top one, functions like what happened immediately after, which is what I would put and recommend for paragraph 4 of a 5 paragraph report. And then this one, the one below, would function as paragraph 5 of a 5 paragraph report. So that's why I separated them so that you can see sometimes, let's go back to to the previous paragraph. We have a lot of details happening quickly back to back, but when put in formal tone and with formal language, it is extended, moving forward again, it is extended so that we can now separate the ideas and we're better able to see the development of the report. So that is why I recommend really going through that 5 paragraph report structure with students and drilling it into them, have them memorize what goes into each of the 5 paragraphs so that they would be able to make decisions like this one where they can separate it. And 2 to 3 fairly lengthy sentences in one paragraph is more than enough information. There is really no specified length in terms of how many paragraphs you need and how long each paragraph is supposed to be. I have had students tell me that this is both for narratives and reports, right? I have had students tell me that, teachers tell them they need X amount of paragraphs and X amount of length. Um, there is the Ministry of Education doesn't really specify. I personally work with a 5 paragraph report structure because I think it helps students understand. But once students have mastered that 5 paragraph structure in terms of the type of information that is supposed to go into each paragraph, if they choose to write 4 paragraphs, they can merge paragraphs. If they choose to write 6 paragraphs, if they have that amount of detail and speed in their writing that they can go to 6 paragraphs within the time required, then that is also fine. The whole issue is, have they covered what is required from the prompt? Have they given sufficient details? And have they kept that formal tone. So I thought that we could, would have started with that, with the report writing, and so that you can get that sense of formal language, formal tone. Now, before we move on to the narratives, let's talk just a little bit about strategies for building that formal tone. Now, of course, with multisensory learning, we have to talk about some games, and there are lots of different games that you can play with the report writing, language and vocabulary. You can have matching, you can have taboo, you can have lots of different things. I like games that are very interactive, especially with the issue of making report writing and creative writing in general a little bit more interactive and fun. And so there's a game I play with my students that I'm going to share with you. I call it the Admiral and Breads. And pretty much what it is that the Admiral represents the formal language, formal tone, and the breads, brethren, partner, your horse. I don't know, people say that still. Oh my goodness, showing my age. So yeah, and that other character represents the casual language. And what you can do is present students with the different vocabulary words and have them do action. So usually Admiral is a kind of straighten up kind of, and the breads they could make up whatever what they want. Most students do a kind of, it's like what up, homie, those kinds of things. And that helps them sort of activate in the entire body what formal tone is expected of them and have some fun with the casual tone at the same time. So they're able to then distinguish, is and every week add new vocabulary words, mix it up, have the students come up with their own. And for every breads word they identify, ask them, make sure they can identify the formal version. So even if they know this is casual, what would you say instead? And of course, you could play teams, you could play individual, add bonus points if they could get the formal word. If they can't, give the other team a chance to. So all of that works well toward the formal tone. So playing games, absolutely, please play some games with the formal tone. Get Have some fun with this, really get the kids moving and that kind of thing. And this is something you could do in a classroom, and it's perfect when you have teams, so you could divide the classroom into two groups and have each group send a representative if you don't want the whole class. So as a group, you can do it in general, throw out a few for the whole class and see who gets it right or not. And then if you divide into teams, then you can have a competition and have each team send a representative so that, it's not going to be too boisterous and so on. But excuse me, have the team send a representative so that the representative is the one who's doing the action. So, like you're doing turn taking, you're doing the formal tone, formal vocabulary, having some fun, reinforcing ideas, all of that happening at once in the creative writing classroom. So, there's that, right? Now, that is for, let's see. The other thing that I want to mention is that understanding formal vocabulary requires students to read more formal language. Now, I know we talk about how reading and writing are connected. We've done lots of discussions on that. They're so connected, they're two sides of the same coin, and so on. But reading novels and stories is not going to present the student with the kind of language in context to help them understand that formal tone and formal vocabulary that they need for a report. So their reading material needs to be extended. And it's fairly easy to do that. I know lots of parents say, well, oh, I can't get them to read, and the student just doesn't like to read. My child doesn't read. Here's what: if you're presenting your child with information that they are interested in, they're more likely to want to read it. I'm not saying it's a magic pill and they will suddenly want to read, but they would be more likely to want to read it if it is the information is about things that they are interested in. So find out what your child is interested in. Do they like sports? Find a formal article about one of their favorite sporting personalities or a game that they like. If they're interested in, stars and planets and those kinds of things, then you have a wide range of materials, National Geographic and all those things, they're interested in nature. And if it is that you find interesting articles, but they're not formal enough in terms of most articles have some sort of formal tone here and there, unless it's like the really technical academic style, then you can go through it and make some modifications to make it meet the SEA standard of formality that students require and present them that to read. So, and of course, you don't want to, if a child is really challenged for reading, if they have issues, then you want to work within their challenges and make accommodations. But if it is that they just simply don't like reading because they think it's boring and tedious, then break it up into smaller pieces. Do a paragraph at a time, two, three sentences at a time. As long as you have them reading and going through formal writing and formal tone so that you can really, really get them experiencing that formal vocabulary. So, so far, we're dealing with the formal tone. We just looked at two paragraphs, one fairly casual, no transitions, missing. Well, there was one transition, but it was not as strong as others could have been used. Some problems with the vocabulary. So then what we did was to show an alternative and how and why some of these things needed to be changed. And then the two strategies that we covered relating to the report writing and building vocabulary, play games. I explained one, and there are others that you can come up with. Modify games that students already play to fit. And then the other is to have students reading more formal types of writing. This is where the nonfiction would come in. It would really help. And not only is this going to help with their writing and their vocabulary, it would also help with their comprehension, because there is always the possibility of getting a nonfiction passage for comprehension at the ELA section of the exam. So you're dealing with many things at the same time and really giving the student, really giving your child that comprehensive look at the report writing and so on. So that is it for reports. And let's see, this week, what are we working on with the narratives? We are looking at practicing plotting stories. So we spoke about, in previous episodes, we spoke about the different kinds of stories and why students should know that. We looked at plotting instead of planning. Then we looked at that six-part story structure. We looked at the importance of conflict, developing conflict, and today, excuse me, we're taking a little pause with that to go back and practice plotting. So now that students understand what the conflict is and why the essay narrative absolutely must have conflict, they understand the different types of conflict. And now we're looking at the elevation of conflict and the fact that conflict has to get worse before it can get better. And that's where your rising action comes from. That's what we have been talking about all this time. Now we can have students practicing plotting stories so that they're implementing all this knowledge that they've gained about the the plot, about plot development, about conflict development. So we want to give them opportunities to do this. Now, I always begin with videos, fun videos that work quite well. So I go through the video, and like I've said in several of the presentations, I use what I call the 12-point plot development. And so when I choose a video for the students to use, I go through the video and make sure that I can identify each point in the plot, and once I can, then I would share the video with students and have them plot. And so what I'll do is I do this for at least 3 times. Once we do it together as a class during the discussion. The other time they work in pairs or small groups where they help each other. And then the third time they work on their own as an assignment and they submit. And then from there, then we do a prompt. So we're moving from that guidance with I'm presented with the story and I'm just identifying the sections. And then we move on to a prompt. So I give them an actual SEA style prompt, one that I created myself, or sometimes I use from the past papers and so on. Um, and I have them, we discuss it as a class. We discuss it and we look at, different points in the plot and how, what kind of plot we can get from this kind of thing. And, so we have that discussion. And then we go through the same process as we did with the videos. So we work with, as a class, as a group, then students work in pairs, smaller groups, and then they work independently to create their own plot. So if you're working with a group of students, then that's the kind of way that you should go. If you're working with just your child, then you work with them, um, discussing it and putting it together. Then you are there while they're working on it, so they can ask you questions as they're putting things together. And then the third level will be they work on their own, completely independently, without your input, and you can review. So you always want to begin with support and then gradually remove the support before you have students work independently. And at this point, by practicing plotting stories, students are reviewing the kind of story that they want to work with, because while going through the different kinds of stories, we would have discussed different types of plots that work well with certain types of stories and how the plot would look different and so on. And they're looking at conflict, so they're making choices about conflict, as well as they are putting their ideas together to create that rising action with the development of the conflict. So, plotting stories at this point is a kind of review and reinforcement. And here is where you will begin to see if the student really understands plot and plot development. Chances are you're going to have to review what conflict is, you're going to have to review the intervention, and the fact that you do need conflict, and that 3-step points of conflict so that you can see and experience that rising action. And remember what I said, the way the schedule is created is that we move forward and come back, we move forward and come back, we move forward and come back. And each time we're going further forward and we're coming back less. So each movement would create that kind of reinforcement cycle to help students remember and really internalize and understand. Now, that strategy for that kind of cyclical movement, it takes a little time to build momentum and develop. And of course, the reinforcement is built into the schedule so that you don't necessarily have to work on reinforcing otherwise. What you would do otherwise is practice, because you do want to give students as many opportunities as possible to implement what they're working on. because it is in the implementation that you see whether they truly understand a concept or not. And maybe they understand it, but they're having some difficulty, translating it into their own writing. This is why we move forward and come back, and we have that reinforcement cycle being built into the whole schedule and the whole strategy. Okay, so what else do you need to know about plotting stories? Where do you find videos to work with? I go with YouTube. I look for animated shorts because the animated ones are usually shorter and easier to work with. Um, the other day in class, I was a little bit hesitant because of the content of this short, but I went ahead with it. The class had this particular class has only male students, and a lot of the things that I choose, they're soft and they're kind of girly, and in as much as I'm not a girly girl, I tend to work on and then the parent in me also is always sanitizing everything, right? So for this one, I decided to work with a video from Overwatch. And I learned that Overwatch is one of those video games. It's been around forever, and it's one of those first person shooter kind of games where there's a war and there's a whole backstory behind this game. And if you know anything about video games, you would also know that a lot of the video games have complete worlds, and they do world building, and they complete their stories, and they have little side stories and so on. And because of that, many of them actually create shorts, animated shorts based on the video game. So this particular one has a little bit more action. We were looking at action and adventure stories. And so I figured, okay, let me try this one. And I was absolutely positively surprised and pleasantly surprised to hear these guys discuss the plot and discuss the development of the story, and the fact that it was more action and less adventure, and if it had to be adventure, this is what it should be instead. And I was surprised how they got into it. So definitely begin with the animated shorts because it really, really gets students active and engaged. And you can have some really awesome discussions about the plot and how the plot develops and all those things. So this is where you can begin, where you can look. So definitely YouTube animated shorts. Just make sure that you go through the video beforehand and you are able to identify the different aspects of the plot. And we are going to get back to plot. Let me just double check. I know we come right back to plot. And I think in this schedule, yeah, we pretty much talk about plot often when we look at the different aspects of the plot. So we are going to get through to that. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that yeah, actually, our session next week is about connecting plot points. And I spend a lot of time on plot. You realize that, right? Because it really is the foundation. You do absolutely have to understand plot and getting that rising action if you want to have a really effective narrative style SEA story. So, but in using the animated shorts and the short films, what you would find is that sometimes some of the actions you can't really put them exactly to a point or a particular plot point in terms of, okay, it's moving the story forward. Sometimes you have in a plot information that instead of giving depth, you get breadth with the details of the story. And this is where the description, the vivid description, character description, all of these other things come in. So starting with these animated versions and the animated shorts, that really, really helps students to see that while the plot point itself is a point in the story that moves the story toward climax and resolution, at each plot point, you don't necessarily have to go directly to the next plot point. You can expand a plot point by adding description and, of character and setting, adding some more actions and so on, because that is really what fills out a story and makes a story interesting. So the story is exciting when you move forward to the plot and through plot points, but it gets more interesting when you're able to spread details and so on. And all of that is inherent in the concept of the plot development. That's the 12-point plot development that I mentioned and I keep talking to you about. So if, excuse me, if your child is going okay and they are understanding all the different parts of the types of stories and all those kinds of things, I would recommend that you get a copy of the digital series that I have. I have two series, one for reports, one for narratives. And because they are digital, the cost is 135 for the reports, 145 for the narratives. If I had to print it, it would come up to more than that just from me printing it. And then, well, I would have to, if I want to make a profit on it and anything. So I decided, you know what? Let me just keep these digital. So if you're definitely working toward that SEA 2024 and your child is at the point where they can handle additional details, and they're not starting from scratch, they're not just understanding reports and just understanding narratives, then I would recommend getting a copy of the digital materials, because here's what you're going to get. I'll put a link in the chat after the video so that you can get a sense of what's in it. It's on my website, and you can download the introductory booklet so that you can really understand what's in each of the series. But the report writing series, you get paragraph by paragraph breakdown on what details should be in each of the 5 paragraphs. You get one booklet on each of the different types of reports that I teach, which are 6 of them: incident, accident, activity, event, and competition, plus the natural disasters. So you get all of those, one booklet on each, and each booklet has, like I said, paragraph by paragraph breakdown, plus a sample report for each. Now, the sample reports are just samples, like I said. They are not going to be absolutely perfect. There is no report that is absolutely perfect. Somebody's going to come and see something. Well, why didn't you put that differently? So while they are a good guide, make sure you discuss all the different points with the students. Sometimes students come up with some really awesome ideas of how to refine things. So that's definitely a talking point there. Plus, there's a section, a separate booklet for vocabulary, a separate booklet for analyzing reports. There's a booklet on revising and editing. So altogether, you get like 11 booklets, including the digital, the introduction, which you can start with and see what's what. That's for the reports. For the narratives, you actually get 12 booklets, including the introduction, because not only do I look at the analyzing stories, vocabulary, and so on with the narratives, I also give you in that booklet a copy of the 12-point plot development and a worksheet that you can use to get started with that 12-point plot development. So I'll put the links in the chat. And if you think your child is ready at this point, you can get them started so they can really get into with the narratives. They do different types of stories. Again, sample story for each, a breakdown of that plot development and how you could plot the different types of stories, what is required for action and adventure, what is required for mystery, prompts that you could work with to practice. So there's also the revising and editing. So there's a lot of information that you can, as we go through during these lives, you can check in. Well, okay, so we're dealing with plot. So if you have your introductory booklet, you could do some practice with the plot. You'll have the worksheet and so on, and the formal vocabulary. There's a list in the report booklets of roughly about 50 something formal words and the informal ones, so that you could see, okay, if you're saying this, then this is something else you should be saying instead. So you have those, and I think if you can definitely get a copy, um, all the information would be provided in the link when you purchase, and you get them emailed to you, so you can start using them immediately. You don't have to print the whole booklet, just the worksheet side, but you would have all the information that you could access when you need it as you develop with the writing. Okay. So yeah, the textbooks for the report writing almost finished. The printer said sometime this week. Today is Tuesday. So I'm hoping I would have something in hand to show you by next week. It's exciting. Um, and the flashcards, I'm really looking forward. The flashcards were really, really good looking when I did them. So and they're very useful. So there's a flashcard poster. I'm going to get the supplementary information up and running. So by the time you get your flashcards and poster, you'd be able to log into my website and get additional downloads and worksheets and that type of thing. So um, yeah, so I think that's it for today. Thank you for those of you who were able to stick around through the live. I really appreciate, not talking to myself all the time. And for those of you who are looking at the recording, thank you very, very much for taking the time, as I said before. And, send me your questions. If you've been trying things out, tell me how they're working, tell me what works, what you're still having challenges with. Because, when you tell me what your challenges are, my analytical brain goes to work immediately trying to figure out what I can do for you to help you solve those challenges. And so please don't think you're bothering me. I may not be able to respond immediately, but send me the messages. Tell me what the challenges are so that I would know how best I can support and how best I can help you with addressing those challenges where the creative writing is concerned. So we're working toward SEA 2024, and this, I think, is session number 8. And so we're moving slowly forward. Like I said, forward, recycle to make sure that we're reinforcing as we go so that by the time students get to the drills, then they would be able to remember and implement all the skills that they've practiced so far. So do have a wonderful rest of today. It's quite a rainy holiday, and but it's a good time to take a rest. I'm going to be taking a rest after this. Rejuvenate for the rest of the week. And I look forward to showing you the completed printed books next week. But have a wonderful rest of today. All right, everybody. So take care.